The world is filled with many places that people would love to go to, and well, people do go to these places. And majority of the times, these places are safe or pretty close to being safe. But what if the places that people wanted to go to were not safe at all, and in fact very dangerous? Well, in today's video, we're going to be talking about 3 places that people have went to and either have passed away or severely traumatized. But before we begin, if true crime stories intrigues your interest, then I highly suggest you subscribe to my YouTube channel, as that's all I do and I upload once a week. But with all that being said, let's begin. This first story starts off with a man named Chow, who was born on December the 18th, 1991, in a big city called Scottsboro. And the city itself was located in Alabama, where Chow and about 20,000 people would live inside of it. His parents would move to America during their early ages in hopes of making it big and living that American dream. And so they would decide to pack their bags and move to Scottsboro. But years later, they would fall pregnant with their first child. And then a couple of years later, the second child. And again, a couple of more years later, the third child. And this really put a financial strain on the family. So they would move out from Scottsboro and move over to Vancouver, Washington, where they would find a decent sized house, but it was mainly affordable. Chow would move to Vancouver very young, and so he would be quickly attending school, which the school was called the Vancouver Christians High School. Not much was really known about Chow's school life, apart from the fact that he had a small group of friends, and he would find his true love, the outdoors, and also his love for Christianity. Anything that had to do with the outdoors, such as camping, hiking, or just traveling, Chow would get really excited, and he would act like he had received a Christmas present early every time his parents or the school went out hiking or camping. And as older he got, so did his passion, and he would join a program which was all about nature and the outdoors. The exact specifics about what this program was is really unknown, but either way it was something to do with the outdoors, which was what Chow loved. And once finally Chow graduated from high school, he would attend the Oral Roberts University, which that school was located in Oklahoma, and there he would develop an admiration for famous explorers such as David Livingstone and Bruce Olson. And Chow would become very obsessed with these two individuals, studying about their lives and their impact after they died. These two people would inspire Chow to go on these crazy explorations during his off time. For example, he would go mountain climbing. The exact mountain that he went on isn't known, but either way, this would be one of many things that Chow would do thanks to his idols. Finally, in 2014, Chow would graduate with a Bachelor of Science. But I know you might be getting bored, but stay with me. In 2018, a couple of years later after Chow had graduated, Chow would participate to go to Mexico and South Africa to do missionary trips. And if you don't know what missionary trips are, it's when basically someone volunteers to teach kids who are less fortunate the basics of maths and English. And so he would go back and forth to these places. But this would spark Chow to do more missionary trips. And so in October 2018, he would go to this place called the Port of Blair, which was the capital of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And these islands themselves aren't too special, they're just regular islands where people would live on. But there's a nearby island that's not too far away, which is actually forbidden to go on. And why is it forbidden? Well, you're about to find out. Chow would actually enjoy Port Blair so much, to the point where he would actually stay there. And well, even though he did enjoy the island itself, the main reason he stayed there was because of that forbidden island, and he wanted to go on there. But the only way to get on this island was through boat. But Chow did not have a boat, so he needed to hire someone that did have a boat. But of course, since that place was so dangerous, none of the locals would take Chow there. So finding someone that was going to risk their lives to take a newly resident person to that forbidden island was pretty hard to find. And again, the island itself was filled with people that couldn't afford to get arrested and sent to jail as they needed to feed families. But somehow Chow would find these two fishermen, and they would agree to take Chow to this island, but for a big fee, which Chow paid 25,000 rupees, which in USD is about 335 USD. So on November 15th, they would make their way to what the locals call it, Satan's last stronghold. The main reason Chow wanted to go on this island, so he could deliver a special present to this island, and also turn this island into a Christian island. And so a couple of hours would go by, and the men would get close to the island, but not too close. The reason was the fishermen that took Chow to the island weren't looking to get any closer due to the risk, and so they would tell Chow that this is close enough, we cannot get any closer than this, but since that's the case, we'll give you a spare boat so you can go fully. Chow looked at the men and said thank you, and also said, please remember, if I die, don't be angry at God. This was meant to be, and leave my body there if that so happens to be the case. And so he turned around, hopped on the smaller boat that the fisherman gave him, and began to go closer to this island. And not even a minute into his journey, all Chow would have heard was primal-like screams coming out from the island. And as Chow looked on where these screams were coming from, he saw multiple figures coming out from the forest inside the island. And as Chow got even closer, he could make out that these were tribal humans, and these humans would rush out onto the beach and start screaming nonsensical things at Chow. Chow, who was still unfazed, would still continue to get closer, and he would start screaming, I am here to teach you the word of Jesus. And he would begin to sing a worship song, which would actually silence these people, until of course Chow stopped. And once Chow stopped, they would begin to start screaming again. And finally, when Chow got close enough to actually make out what these people look like, he could see that these people had barely any clothes on, and they had some sort of paint across their face. And to Chow's horror, he could see that they had swords and bow and arrows. And not just that, they were all pointing towards him. But still fearless, Chow would still continue to head towards this island. And once he got close enough, he would offer them fish and some other gifts. But in response, a young man from the island would shoot an arrow straight at Chow, which the arrow would pierce through Chow's Bible, which was across his chest. And that's when Chow knew that he needed to retreat. And so he would head back to the fisherman's boat and would just tell the men that, let's go. Once back on land, Chow would ask the men that, we need to go back tomorrow, but this time you can just leave me there completely, and I'll show them the way of Jesus. And so on November 17th, the three men would come back to the same spot as they did from yesterday, and they would give Chow the same boat that he used yesterday as well. But this time the fisherman would sail off, and as the fishermen watched Chow go closer and closer to the island, they saw that the same tribal people came running straight out, again screaming nonsensical things. The next day would come around, so 18th of November, and the fishermen were curious on what happened to Chow and how he's doing. So they would hop onto their fishing boat and they would head towards the island. And as they got closer and closer to the island, they could already see that these tribal people were already on the beach, and it seemed like they were dragging something across the beach. And at first they thought that it was some sort of massive fish, but to their horror, it was Chow, and he was deceased. The island that Chow wanted to go on, which I'm presuming they already know, is called the North Sentinel Island, and this island hosts the most isolated tribe in the world, the Sentinelese people. No one knows why they don't want to communicate with the outside world, but either way the Indian government respected their wishes and forbade anyone to go there. And of course the main factor is to respect the wishes of the North Sentinelese people, but the other major factor is these people were hyper aggressive to everybody else that wasn't a Sentinelese. The island itself is about the same size as Manhattan, so it's not massive, but for a tribe that were not big at all, for them it felt like a whole world. And these people have been there for 60,000 plus years, and just like the people back then, they're still the same. And of course anyone like Chow who would try to communicate with these people, either they would go to jail or they would end up like Chow. And those two fishermen that helped Chow to get onto the island would go to jail, but they wouldn't go for too long, and still to this day Chow's body is on the island. Did you know there's a lake so dangerous, 2 people specifically, that somehow you fell in, instantly you would begin to burn up? Well, I'll have you know there's a place called Lake Norton, and from a far distance, it's very pretty to look at. And with its red waters and amazing landscape around it, many people do stare at it from afar. But as I said at the start, the water and the area itself isn't really safe for people. The lake itself is situated by the southern Ewaso River, which that river was located in central Kenya. And the lake itself was not deep at all, it's about 10 feet deep. And let's say this was normal water and you would fall in, you'd be pretty safe from drowning. But unlike normal water, these waters are so high in salt and natron, which is basically high levels of evaporation, and with temperatures up to 50 degrees, it's safe to say it's not safe for people or even animals. But from the photo that you're probably looking at right now, you might be asking, why is the water red? And well, the best and simple way to describe it is basically a lot of scientific chemicals put together to give it that red color. But the worst part about this lake is for some reason, let's say you were flying on a helicopter and you were flying over the lake, and also you had no idea about this lake or its weird features. From the air you'd think it's solid ground, and that's because thanks to the mirror-like surface. And again, from a distance, no one with inexperience with this lake would notice that this was actually a lake. And well, some people would actually get either seriously injured or die due to the fact that they thought it was solid ground. But during the summertime it's a bit more easier due to the fact that a lot of steam's coming out from the water. But anyways, two Australian men named Ben Herbertson and Jeffrey Siberry were an 8-man crew to film some footage for the African wildlife documentary. And while they were in the middle of recording something for the documentary, and they happened to be near the lake as well, and well, everything was going normal until they got above the lake. And for about 5 minutes the pilot did not realize that they were actually slowly descending, and so pretty quickly they became very close to the lake. And the men on board the helicopter actually noticed and told the pilot that, hey, we're pretty close to the ground, don't you think? And that's when it happened. The water off the lake caught the helicopter's landing skis, and it actually instantly made the helicopter plunge nose first into the shallow waters. And when the helicopter fully submerged into the water, it broke instantly, and of course the 8-man crew would fall head first into this water. The men would not die. In fact, Ben would go on to say that when he first landed into the water, he felt his eyes were burning and melting apart, but he could see the shadowy figures of his fellow crewmates. And so even with the intense pain, he would manage to help his crewmates get out from this water. And one of the worst parts was when the helicopter broke apart, it would produce a lot of smoke, and this smoke would essentially be blinding everybody. But somehow the men would get out and find a local tribe nearby, who, to be more specific, were the Maasai tribe, and they would help these men get back to full strength. And the men who ultimately contacted a nearby camp, and that camp would send out a rescue team and they would be saved. The pilot himself would go on to say that the reason why he went so low was due to the fact that the water was so clear, the sun's reflection was blinding him and made him disorientated to the point where they didn't even know how low they were. The year is 2002, and the man by the name of Sean Doyle was working at a restaurant in Lower Manhattan. Sean was just a regular guy who at the time was 25 years old, and his friends would describe him as a little guy who was very cordial and very friendly. When finding a new place to stay in Manhattan, Sean would purposely find a place that was near his work so he wouldn't have to walk too far. But to his surprise, he found out that his sister and one of his good friends would surprise him by moving into the same apartment as him. But another surprise was his good friend, 47-year-old Michael Wright, would also move into the same apartment building, and so this really made Sean happy. Michael and Sean were known as the odd pair of friends, not only because, well, Michael was double the age of Sean, but also the fact that Michael was double the size of Sean as well. He's just this big massive tank of a human being, and so the size difference between him and Sean was pretty staggering. But that wouldn't really stop them from becoming the bestest of friends, and they would hang out with each other all the time and every time that they had free time. But moving on to the same year, December 13th, Sean had just came back home from a double shift, and luckily for him, it was a Friday. And so once he arrived at his apartment, he was ready to cut loose for the weekend. And so as he was taking the elevator up to his floor, he would see down the hall that Michael and his girlfriend were getting ready to go out for the night. And when they saw Sean, they would immediately shout his name and would ask, "You should definitely join us." And again, Sean wanted to go outside, so he would say, "Perfect, let me just go get changed." And when he finally got ready, him, his girlfriend and Michael would go on to go to many different bars which were all over Manhattan. And when early morning struck and it was December 14th, they had decided that it's been a fun night, but let's call it here. The final bar that they decided to drink in was only a couple of blocks away from the main apartment that they all lived in, so they knew getting home would be pretty easy. And so they would leave the bar and set on their little journey back home. And during this walk home, Michael would begin to get more annoyed at Sean. And why? Well, because all through the night he had been watching as Sean began to get more flirty with his girlfriend. And during this walk, he would think that Sean is going too far with this. It was unknown what Sean said that led Michael to think that to be the case. But either way, Michael really believed it. And as soon as he saw the opportunity, he would launch an attack on Sean and would just rapidly begin to punch Sean in the face. And obviously it doesn't help that they're in the middle of the street. And so due to all the commotion, people that lived in the street were overlooking, and they would all say all they heard was just scuffling outside. And when they actually saw through the window what was going on, all they would have saw some massive guy beating up a small guy, and they would continue to watch this big guy just punching and shoving this little guy all over the place. Michael would actually push Sean so far that he would actually fall backwards and would actually fall into this plastic chimney that was over a manhole. And the main reason that plastic chimney was there was so steam could escape, and also to make sure that nobody went inside it. But when Sean stumbled over it, he would basically kick it out the way as he was trying to find his balance, and then once he kicked that plastic bit out the way, he would say that there's a manhole, and to Sean's horror, he would fall 18 feet to the bottom of this manhole. And unfortunately, as soon as he landed, the witnesses would all say they would hear a blood-curdling scream. The reason was the hole that Sean fell into was filled with boiling water and scalding steam, and that was because of a nearby steam leak. When finally the police and paramedics arrived, all they would have heard was Sean screaming from the manhole, and of course they would run to the manhole to look down, but due to the massive amount of steam and the fact that the steam was so hot, they couldn't actually go near it, and overall they couldn't do anything until the steam cleared up. And when eventually the steam cleared, they could finally see Sean at the bottom of this manhole, and he's just standing in the middle of this manhole, and up to his waist was just boiling hot water, and obviously he was going through some next level pain. When Sean saw the officers looking down back at him, all he did was just reach his hands up and ask the officers to save him. So they would get the steam turned off, and they would try to lower something so Sean could grab on and then he could be pulled back up, but unfortunately his body began to shut down and he couldn't grab onto anything. So the police would consider sending a person down to save Sean, but the problem was, even though the steam was off, the hole was still about 300 degrees in heat, and so realistically no one could go down there. And knowing that they couldn't do anything, the police, paramedics and other people that were nearby would listen to Sean as he's desperately calling out for help, and sadly after 10 minutes it would go quiet. And 4 whole hours later, the hole would cool off eventually, and so finally someone could go down there and retrieve Sean's body. And the cause of his death would not be Michael, who would be steamed alive. And the crazy, downright horrific part about this whole story is when being burned alive, your nerve system would burn away instantly, so you wouldn't really feel the pain, or at least you wouldn't feel anything after a couple of minutes. But when it comes to steam burns, no matter how severe they are, they don't destroy nerve systems like flames do. And you guessed it, Sean would have felt every second of being in that hole. Michael would get charged of second-degree murder, but no one knows if he was found guilty or what sentence he was given. So that'll be it for today's video. If true crime stories intrigues your interest, then I highly suggest you subscribe to my YouTube channel, as that's all I do, and I upload once a week. But with all that being said, thank you for watching, and yeah, goodbye.